I remember it was almost 10 a.m. and it was one of those days where I had the morning off and I was going to try to catch up with a little bit of extra sleep. And we had a system, my chief of staff, Dan Gilman, and I, that if something went terribly wrong, that he was always to call me twice. We called it double tap. And we had never used the system. And I remember that morning looking at the phone and seeing that he was calling me and just letting it ring. And then immediately the phone rang a second time. And I knew something was terribly wrong. I picked up the phone and I can't remember the exact words he said, but it was active shooter, Tree of Life, officers down, multiple casualties. Both Dan and I live just a few blocks from Tree of Life. We live on the other side of the street in a neighborhood called Point Breeze. Our neighborhood is literally Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Fred Rogers lived much of his life up the street from us, just a couple of blocks from Tree of Life. So by the time that we arrived at the synagogue, we were there before SWAT had even gotten there. It was cold, it was overcast, and it was raining. And as we waited for the news to arrive, I watched as one by one public safety officials rushed in. First, it was the city of Pittsburgh, police, fire, EMS, but then we started noticing them coming from all over. And by the time that we were almost an hour in, they were coming from outside counties as well. After we had secured the scene and the suspect was taken out of the building, it became time to try to find a way to get the information to the families. There's times in combat when those that are in command positions are faced with the trauma of loss, especially with those that they have stood shoulder to shoulder with. When you're dealing as a mayor with a horrific situation as a mass homicide, you're going to know the people in your community who you've lost. The only difference is that commander in the battlefield doesn't go to the living room that evening to be with the families. They don't sit with the families at the funeral or go and meet with the families in the hospital as they struggle for their lives. The situation of a mayor is not only in the situation when something goes horribly wrong, but in the situation of being with those families through the trauma that will continue in those days, weeks, months, and years after, and in working in the healing of a community. Understanding that decisions would be made first and foremost over the victims' families. What is it that they needed? What was it that they wanted? What is it that their priorities were? Would become the guiding principle that I would make decisions from and that the city would move towards. The second would be those that were in the hospital and making sure that they and their families had everything that they needed in order to survive. The third would be the targeted group, in this case the Jewish community, in understanding that they would not be at any point having the feeling that they were alone, that they would understand that never again means never again, and that Pittsburgh would be the place that would put its foot down and say that we will not allow this to happen again, that we will work together as one community, and that an attack against one is an attack against all. As I stood there in the rain, as the incident was still unfolding, with the suspect still in the building, I looked across the street and I saw my friend Wazi Muhammad. Wazi was the executive director of the Islamic Center. And I walked across the street and I said, "Why are you here?" And Wazi was standing there with the executive board of the Islamic Center. And he said, "We have to be here. We heard the news as we were having our executive board meeting, and we came here to be with our neighbors." It's not surprising in Pittsburgh. Back after September 11th, the Jewish community went to the Islamic Center and presented them with a flag of the United States. And it's from those actions of years of building an interfaith dialogue in Pittsburgh that you saw everybody there together on that horrific day, supporting one another and being with the Jewish community as one. If there were lessons that were learned that came out of all of this, it's that you never can prepare enough for an event like what happened at Tree of Life. But as a city, you can build into your city the types of actions which allow people to build community, which allow organizations to work together, which tear down walls and build bridges. The actions that happened in the days, in the weeks, and the months following the horrific event of October 27th will forever be in my mind. Cities are under a constant threat. Issues such as hate, polarization, extremism have become mainstreamed. The threats of cities is real. The impact that it has is not only through the horrific events that we witness on the news on a weekly basis, but the constant drum of those types of threats and what they have in the daily living within our neighborhoods. The reports that don't get reported on a national basis, but that we see in the headlines of our local papers. In order to be able to address these issues, there needs to be a strong network of cities across nations, of leadership that is willing to come up with pragmatic solutions. Build the type of communities that we all want to live in.